The human fleet began its withdrawal from Zephyr Prime as quickly as it had arrived. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the rescued children board medical ships for the journey home. Ben Parker, Amy Foster, Ryan, Mitchell, and their 6 companions were finally safe. But the cost had been staggering. Over 4,000 human military personnel had died in the rescue operation. Hundreds of ships had been destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The economic impact on human colonies would last for years. Nobody cared. Commander Vexthal watched the human fleet depart with a mixture of relief and horror. In 6 weeks, these aliens had shattered everything he thought he knew about warfare. They had attacked the most powerful empire in the galaxy and won, not through superior technology or tactics, but through sheer determination to protect their young. "Sir, the High Council is requesting your immediate presence," his aide reported, nervously. Vexthal knew what that meant. He would be stripped of rank and probably exiled for his catastrophic error in judgment, but he almost welcomed it. After what he had witnessed, continuing to serve in the military seemed pointless anyway. The Zephyrian High Council convened in emergency session to address the worst military defeat in their species' history. They had lost entire fleets to an enemy that should have been easily conquered. Worse, they had learned that humans were not the weak agricultural species they had assumed. "How do we prevent this from happening again?" High Counselor Nethak demanded. The military advisors had no good answers. "We could increase border defenses, but if they're willing to sacrifice unlimited resources for emotional reasons, no defense would be adequate." Science Director Cathara had spent the rescue operation studying her data about human psychology. Her conclusions were disturbing. Their protective response toward their young appears to override all other considerations, including self-preservation. This makes them essentially impossible to control through conventional hostage tactics. On Earth, the returning fleet was welcomed as heroes. Crowds gathered at every spaceport to cheer the ships carrying the rescued children. Parents who had never met Ben Parker or Amy Foster or Ryan Mitchell wept with joy at their safe return. Dr. Paul Martinez was already working on his official report about the Zephyrian conflict. His analysis would become required reading at every military academy in human space. The key lesson was simple. Humans would pay any price to protect their children. But Paul was also thinking about the broader implications. Other species would learn about this conflict. They would understand what happened when human children were threatened. That knowledge might prevent future incidents, but it would also change how aliens viewed humanity. Jake Morrison was waiting at the spaceport on New Haven when the transport ship carrying the children finally arrived. He had spent 2 months coordinating recovery efforts at the colony while following news of the rescue operation. Seeing Ben, Amy, and Ryan walk down the ship's ramp was worth every sleepless night. "Welcome home," Jake said as he embraced each of the children. Ben Parker looked older than his 8 years. The experience had changed him in ways that would take time to understand. But he was alive and safe and back where he belonged. Amy Foster ran to her father, who had traveled from the Botanical Research Station to meet her. She had kept detailed mental notes about Zephyrian plant life that she could hardly wait to share with him. Her scientific curiosity had actually helped her survive the ordeal. Ryan Mitchell collapsed into his mother's arms and cried for the first time since the rescue. He had been brave for so long that finally being safe felt overwhelming. His parents held him and promised he would never have to be that brave again. Captain Nick Anderson submitted his after-action report to Admiral Sullivan 3 days after, returning to Earth. The mission had succeeded beyond all expectations, primarily because the children had participated in their own rescue. But Nick was troubled by the broader implications. "Admiral, other species are going to study this conflict very carefully," he told Kate during their debriefing. "They'll learn that threatening human children triggers responses that ignore normal military calculations." Kate nodded. She had been thinking about the same issue. "Do you think that's a problem?" "I think it makes us more dangerous than we realized," Nick replied. "And I think other species need to understand that." The Zephyrian Empire formally requested peace negotiations 6 months after the rescue operation. They offered territorial concessions that would have satisfied most human demands for expansion rights. They proposed technology exchanges that could advance human science by decades. They even offered to pay reparations for the unprovoked attack. On New Haven, Admiral Sullivan attended the negotiations as the senior human representative. The Zephyrian delegation was led by a new commander who had replaced Vexthal after his disgrace and exile. The alien seemed nervous throughout the proceedings. "We wish to ensure that such conflicts never occur again," the new Zephyrian commander said formally. "That's simple," Kate replied. "Don't take our children." The peace treaty that emerged from those negotiations became known as the Children's Accord. It established clear protocols for contact between human and Zephyrian forces. More importantly, it included specific provisions about the treatment of human juveniles that made their protected status absolutely clear. But the real impact of the conflict was felt throughout the galaxy as news spread to other species. The story of how humans had destroyed entire fleets to rescue 9 children became legend among alien civilizations. Some species saw it as evidence that humans were dangerously irrational. Others recognized it as proof that humans could be trusted to protect the innocent. All of them understood that threatening human children was the fastest way to face total war. Ben Parker grew up to become a diplomat specializing in interspecies relations. His childhood experience as a prisoner of war gave him unique insights into how different species thought about conflict and cooperation. He spent his career ensuring that the lessons learned during his rescue were never forgotten. Amy Foster became a xenobiologist and eventually led the first joint human-Zephyrian research expedition to catalog plant life in neutral space. Her ability to see scientific opportunities even in hostile situations made her valuable for establishing peaceful contact with new species. Ryan Mitchell joined the Terran Defense Force and rose to become Admiral Sullivan's successor as fleet commander. His understanding of what it felt like to be helpless and afraid motivated him to ensure that no human child would ever face that situation again. The Children's Accord became the foundation for broader peace treaties with dozens of other species. But more importantly, it established humanity's reputation as a species that could not be controlled through threats against their young. 10 years after the rescue operation, Commander Vexthal published his memoirs from exile. The book became required reading at military academies across the galaxy. His final chapter contained a warning that every species learned by heart. "I thought I was capturing research specimens. I thought I was taking hostages who would ensure human cooperation. I thought I understood how conquest worked. I was wrong about everything. Humans are not like other species. They value their children more than their own lives, more than their colonies, more than their entire civilization. Take human children, and you face an enemy that will never stop, never negotiate, and never forgive." I learned this truth too, late. Let my mistake be a lesson for any species that considers threatening human young. The price is total war, and humans will pay it gladly. The galaxy learned that lesson well. In the 50 years that followed the Children's Accord, no alien species ever again attempted to take human children as prisoners or hostages. The protective instinct that had nearly destroyed the Zephyrian Empire became humanity's most effective deterrent against aggression. Parents across human space told their children the story of Ben Parker, Amy Foster, Ryan Mitchell, and the Six. Other kids who survived captivity through courage and cooperation. But they also told them about Admiral Sullivan, Captain Anderson, General Coleman, and the thousands of humans who gave their lives to bring those children home. The lesson was simple but profound. Humanity would protect its young at any cost. Other species could cooperate with humans, trade with humans, even fight humans over territory or resources. But they could never threaten human children without facing the full fury of a species that valued family above everything else. That knowledge kept the peace for generations to come. And in quiet moments, when human parents tucked their own children into bed at night, they knew that their species had proven something important about itself. They had shown the galaxy that some things were worth any sacrifice. They had shown that love could be the most powerful weapon of all. Commander Vexthal stood in his command center watching reports flood in from across the Zephyrian Empire. In the past month, human forces had destroyed 16 military outposts, captured 3 supply bases, and eliminated an entire patrol fleet. The losses were staggering not because of their scale, but because of how they were achieved. "Sir, the humans have breached the Kepler defense line," his tactical officer reported. "They lost 60 ships taking out our 20-vessel patrol, but they're continuing to advance." Vexthal stared at the tactical display. By any reasonable military calculation, the humans should have retreated after losing 60 ships. Instead, they were pushing deeper into Zephyrian space with their remaining forces. It was tactical madness. "What is their objective?" Vexthal demanded. "Unknown, sir. They're not targeting our major facilities or supply routes. They seem to be moving directly toward Zephyr Prime." On Earth, Admiral Kate Sullivan was coordinating the largest military operation in human history from the Fleet Command Center. Hundreds of ships had gathered for the final assault. The cost had been enormous already, but no one suggested stopping. Casualty reports from the outer systems. Her aide reported quietly. Kate read the numbers. 3,000 human military personnel, dead or missing. Dozens of ships destroyed. Under normal circumstances, losses like that would force a government to reconsider any military operation. These were not normal circumstances. "Continue the advance," Kate ordered. "All fleets maintain course for Zephyr Prime." General Steve Coleman was leading the tactical planning for the final assault. He had studied every piece of intelligence Captain Nick Anderson's team had gathered. The Zephyrian capital was heavily defended, but their enemies were still thinking in terms of conventional warfare. "They expect us to negotiate," Steve told his staff officers. "They think we'll demand prisoner exchanges or territorial concessions. They don't understand that we're here to get our children back, and nothing else matters." Dr. Paul Martinez had been analyzing Zephyrian communications intercepts and found clear evidence of confusion in their leadership. Their military commanders could not understand human tactical decisions. Their political leaders were beginning to panic as the human fleet approached their core systems. "They're starting to realize this isn't a normal military campaign," Paul reported to Admiral Sullivan. "Some of their outer colonies are requesting permission to surrender independently." Kate looked at the strategic display showing human forces advancing on multiple fronts. The Zephyrians were losing battles they should have won because they could not adapt to enemies who fought without regard for acceptable loss ratios. Captain Nick Anderson's reconnaissance team had finally reached Zephyr Prime. The massive planet, hung in space surrounded by defense platforms and patrol ships. It should have been impossible to approach undetected, but the Zephyrians were focused on the major fleet actions happening in outer systems. "We've located the research facility where the children are being held," Lieutenant Maria Santos reported. "Heavy security, but not military grade. They're still thinking of this as a prisoner containment operation." Nick studied the intelligence data. The facility was in the capital city, protected by research security rather than military forces. If they could create enough distraction elsewhere, a small team might be able to reach the children. On Zephyr Prime, Ben Parker was implementing the escape plan he had been developing for weeks. He had figured out how to disable the electronic locks on their doors during the next guard shift change. Amy Foster had convinced one of the research assistants to show her the emergency evacuation routes. Ryan Mitchell had identified a communications terminal they could use to send a signal. But, more importantly, the children had realized that their captors were becoming increasingly nervous about something happening outside the facility. The guards talked in worried voices about human military forces approaching the system. Science Director Kethara was reviewing her research data when Commander Vexthal contacted her directly. "Doctor, we may need to evacuate the research specimens to a more secure location." "Commander, my studies are at a critical phase," Kethara protested. "Moving the subjects now would compromise months of work." "The human fleet is 6 days out from Zephyr Prime," Vexthal replied grimly. "If they're willing to sacrifice this many ships just to reach our capital, they may be planning something we haven't anticipated." Admiral Sullivan's fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyr system like an arriving storm. 400 human ships appeared simultaneously, their weapons powered and shields raised. It was the largest concentration of military force anyone had ever brought to the Zephyrian capital. The Zephyrian High Council convened in emergency session as their defense forces scrambled to respond. They had expected diplomatic contact or at least some kind of negotiation demand. Instead, they faced a human fleet that seemed prepared for total warfare. "Surely they will attempt communication," High Counselor Nethek said hopefully. "No species commits this level of resources without stating their terms." But the human fleet was already spreading into attack formations. Long-range sensors showed them deploying for simultaneous strikes against multiple targets. They were not coming to negotiate. Commander Vexthal finally understood the magnitude of his error. He had taken prisoners from a species that valued its young more than military logic. The humans were not fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for 9 children, and they would destroy the entire Zephyrian Empire if necessary. "Open communication channels to the human fleet," he ordered desperately. Admiral Sullivan received the communication request, but did not respond immediately. She was watching her ships take positions around Zephyr Prime, while Captain Anderson's team moved toward the surface. Everything depended on timing now. "Admiral, we're receiving surrender offers from 6 Zephyrian colonies," her communications officer reported. "They're offering territorial concessions and reparations." Kate's response was immediate. "Ignore them. We're here for the children." On the surface of Zephyr Prime, Ben Parker activated the door override he had programmed weeks earlier. The electronic C locks disengaged, just as Amy Foster created a distraction by asking their guard about evacuation procedures. Ryan Mitchell slipped away during the confusion and reached the communications terminal. The signal Ryan sent was simple, but it changed everything. 3 words transmitted on the emergency frequency Captain Anderson's team was monitoring. "We are ready." Nick Anderson received the signal and immediately contacted Admiral Sullivan. The children are prepared to assist in their own rescue. Beginning final approach now. The Battle of Zephyr Prime began not with massive fleet engagements, but with precision strikes against communication networks and defense coordination centers. Human forces used their willingness to accept heavy casualties to achieve objectives that seemed impossible to defend against. Zephyrian defenders fought bravely, but they were facing enemies who operated outside normal tactical parameters. Human ships would sacrifice themselves to disable single defense platforms. Human assault teams would charge positions that could not be taken by conventional means. Commander Vexthal watched his carefully planned defenses crumble as human forces accepted loss ratios that should have forced any reasonable military to retreat. His subordinates kept asking for new orders as their defensive positions became untenable. "Sir, what are our objectives?" his tactical officer asked desperately. "How do we fight enemies who don't care about their own survival?" Vexthal realized. He had no answer. Everything he knew about warfare assumed that both sides wanted to minimize their own casualties while maximizing enemy losses. The humans had abandoned that assumption completely. Captain Anderson's assault team reached the research facility as explosions lit up the sky above them. The diversionary attacks were working perfectly. Most of the facility's security forces had been redeployed to defend more important targets. Inside the facility, the 9 human children were already moving. Ben Parker had disabled the security systems. Amy Foster was leading the younger kids toward the evacuation route she had learned about. Ryan Mitchell was monitoring guard positions through the communications terminal. When the rescue team breached the facility's outer defenses, they found the children ready and waiting. Ben Parker handed Nick Anderson a detailed map of the building, layout that the kids had created from weeks of observation. "We know where all the important stuff is," Ben said simply. The rescue operation that should have taken hours was completed in minutes because the children had done half the work themselves. As Captain Anderson's team extracted the kids, Admiral Sullivan's fleet maintained pressure on Zephyrian defenses to prevent any pursuit. Commander Vexthal received reports of the successful rescue just as his outer defense line finally collapsed under human assault. He had lost hundreds of ships and thousands of personnel trying to defend against enemies who fought like madmen, and all of it had been for 9 children who were now safely aboard a human rescue ship. The Zephyrian High Council authorized immediate surrender negotiations as human forces prepared for final assault on the capital city. They offered massive territorial concessions, technological exchanges, and reparations that would bankrupt the Empire for generations. Ben Parker woke up in a room with smooth white walls and no windows. The bed was too big for him and made of some material he did not recognize. Amy Foster and Ryan Mitchell were in similar rooms connected by a common area where all 9 human children could spend time together. Science Director Cathara watched them through hidden cameras. The young humans were fascinating subjects. They displayed complex emotional responses and formed social bonds even under stress. Most species became passive when separated from their families. These children were different. They are organizing themselves, Cathara told her research team. The oldest female appears to be establishing leadership patterns. Amy Foster had indeed taken charge of the group. She made sure the younger kids ate their meals and got enough sleep. She organized games to keep everyone's spirits up. She was scared, but she hid it well. "My dad always said that plants survive by adapting to new environments," Amy told the others. "We can adapt too." Ben Parker listened to Amy, but he was planning something else. During his time in community care back on New Haven, he had learned how to be quiet and observant. He noticed things adults missed. Here on the alien ship, he noticed patterns in how their guards behaved. Ryan Mitchell tried to be brave like Amy and Ben, but he cried at night when he thought no one was looking. He missed his mom and dad. He missed his room with posters of spaceships and adventure stories. He wanted to go home. Commander Vexethal was dealing with problems he had not expected. Intelligence reports from the border showed unusual human ship movements. Small, fast vessels had been spotted near Zephyrian space. Scouts, maybe, or advance reconnaissance. Increase patrols on the outer systems. Vexthal ordered his fleet commanders. These humans may attempt some kind of rescue mission. His subordinates looked confused. Commander, surely they would not risk war over 9 specimens. Vexthal was beginning to wonder about that himself. The humans should have sent diplomatic messages by now, offers to negotiate, requests for terms. Instead, there was only silence from human space and mysterious ship activity near the border. Captain, Nick Anderson's reconnaissance team had penetrated deep into Zephyrian territory using a captured trader vessel and forged identification codes. Lieutenant Maria Santos had studied Zephyrian languages and customs until she could pass casual inspection. The team moved carefully from system to system, gathering intelligence about enemy defenses. Their outer worlds are not as heavily defended as we expected, Maria reported during their daily briefing. They're confident that their reputation prevents attacks. Nick studied the tactical data they had collected. The Zephyrians had built their empire through intimidation and overwhelming initial force. They were not used to enemies who fought back effectively. That might give the human fleet an advantage. Any sign of where they're holding the children? Nick asked. All intelligence points to Zephyr Prime, Maria replied. It's their capital and primary research facility. If they're studying the kids, that's where they'll be. Back in human space, Admiral Kate Sullivan was coordinating the largest fleet ever assembled. Ships continued to arrive from distant colonies. The industrial capacity of dozen worlds had been redirected to support the rescue mission. Public support remained overwhelming, but Kate was worried about casualties. A direct assault on Zephyr Prime would cost thousands of lives even if it succeeded. She needed to find a way to rescue the children without destroying her own fleet in the process. General Steve Coleman had a different perspective. He had been studying reports from border skirmishes and had noticed something interesting. Human forces were winning battles they should have lost. The Zephyrians were good fighters, but they became confused when their enemies used tactics that seemed to ignore self-preservation. They don't understand us, Steve told Kate during their daily strategy meeting. When we're willing to take casualties they consider unacceptable, it disrupts their entire decision-making process. Dr. Paul Martinez had been analyzing intercepted Zephyrian communications. The enemy leadership was definitely concerned about human military activity. They had expected diplomatic contact or surrender demands. Instead, they were facing an enemy that seemed to be preparing for total war. Their psychology works against them in this situation, Paul explained. They calculate risk and benefit for every decision. They cannot comprehend an enemy that is willing to pay any price for a goal that seems minor to them. On Zephyr Prime, the children were adapting to their situation in ways that surprised their captors. Ben Parker had figured out the daily routine of their guards. He knew when shift changes happened and how long they had between security checks. Amy Foster had befriended one of the younger Zephyrian research assistants by showing curiosity about their technology. The alien seemed to enjoy explaining things and did not realize how much information Amy was gathering about the facility's layout. Ryan Mitchell had discovered that the walls between their rooms were not as solid as they appeared. He could hear conversations in adjacent areas and had started mapping the building based on sounds and voices, but it was the psychological effect on their captors that was most significant. The Zephyrians had expected the human children to become depressed and compliant. Instead, they remained active and alert. They asked questions. They explored their environment. They supported each other emotionally. Science Director Keth Ara found this behavior puzzling. Most species show submission responses after separation from their social groups, she told Commander Vexthal. These humans continue to display resistance. Behaviors. Meanwhile, the first human attacks began on Zephyrian outposts. Captain Nick Anderson's reconnaissance had identified weak points in the enemy's defensive network. Small human forces struck at isolated bases and supply convoys. What shocked the Zephyrians was not just that the humans were attacking, but how they fought. Human ships would ram Zephyrian vessels rather than retreat when their weapons failed. Human soldiers would charge enemy positions that could not be taken by conventional means. They seemed to have no fear of death. Commander Vexthal received increasingly disturbing reports from his field commanders. Human forces were accepting casualty rates that should break any military unit. They fought with an intensity that defied rational analysis. "Sir, the humans destroyed an entire patrol squadron to capture one communications satellite," his intelligence officer reported. "They lost half their own ships in the process." Vexthal stared at the tactical display. This made no sense, according to everything he knew about warfare. No species should be willing to trade 5 ships for one enemy vessel unless the strategic value was enormous. What could they hope to gain from a communications satellite? Unknown, sir. The equipment was standard. Reconnaissance gear. But Vexthal was beginning to understand that he did not understand these humans at all. They were not following logical military doctrine. They were fighting for something that made conventional tactics irrelevant. Back on Earth, Admiral Sullivan was coordinating with colonies across human space to support the rescue operation. The response had exceeded all expectations. Entire populations were volunteering to help in whatever way they could. More importantly, intelligence from Captain Anderson's team was providing detailed information about Zephyrian defenses. The enemy was strong, but they were not prepared for the kind of warfare humans were bringing to them. "We have their fleet dispositions around Zephyr Prime," Nick reported during a secure communication. "Heavy defenses, but concentrated around key facilities. If we can create diversions at multiple points, we might be able to reach the research center where the children are held." Kate studied the tactical data. It would still cost hundreds of human lives, but for the first time since the crisis began, she saw a path to victory. "Proceed with detailed reconnaissance," she ordered. "And Nick, find those children. We're coming for them." On Zephyr Prime, Ben Parker was putting together everything he had learned about their prison. He had figured out the security systems, the guard rotations, and the layout of the research facility. More importantly, he had realized that their captors still thought of them as helpless specimens. That was going to be their mistake. Amy Foster had gathered detailed information about Zephyrian technology and psychology from her conversations with the research staff. She understood how their captors thought and what their weaknesses might be. Ryan Mitchell had created a mental map of the entire facility based on what he could hear through the walls. He knew where other prisoners were held, where the important equipment was located, and how the building systems worked. The 9 human children were no longer just victims waiting to be rescued. They were becoming active participants in their own liberation, and none of their alien captors realized it yet. Admiral Kate Sullivan was reviewing supply reports when the priority message arrived. She had been commanding the Terran Defense Force for 8 years and thought she had seen every kind of crisis. Pirates attacking trade routes, border disputes with aggressive species, resource conflicts between colonies. But she had never seen a message like this one. "They took our children." The words appeared on her screen in stark white letters. The message came from Jake Morrison at New Haven Colony. Kate read it 3 times before she understood what it meant. Then she felt something she had not felt since her own daughter was, born 20 years ago. Pure, cold rage. Kate activated the fleet-wide communication system. Her voice reached every human ship within 50 light years. All vessels return to base immediately. Priority Alpha protocols are now in effect. Captain, Nick Anderson was hunting pirates near the Centauri border when he received the recall order. He had been in special operations for 15 years. He had fought in 3 wars and countless smaller conflicts. But something in the Admiral's voice made his blood turn to ice. "What's the emergency?" his communications officer asked. Nick read. The message forwarding from Fleet Command, his hands clenched into fists. "Change course for Earth. Maximum speed." On Mars, General Steve Coleman was planning training exercises when his aide burst into his office. The young lieutenant looked pale and shaken. "Sir, you need to see this immediately." Steve read the report about New Haven Colony. 9 human children taken by aliens called Zephyrians, hostages or test subjects or both. He had commanded troops in ground battles across a dozen worlds. He had seen good soldiers die for causes that seemed important at the time, but this was different. "Cancel all current operations," Steve ordered. "Prepare for full mobilization." "Sir, what's our objective?" Steve's voice was deadly quiet. "Get our children back." Dr. Paul Martinez was studying xenopsychology reports at the University of Luna when his research terminal chimed with an urgent message. He was the leading expert on alien cultures in human space. Governments called him when they needed to understand how other species thought. This time, the message came directly from Admiral Sullivan. "I need everything you know about Zephyrians. Everything." Paul had studied the Zephyrian Empire for years. They were an old species that had conquered dozens of others. They believed in strength above all else. They saw other species as tools to be used. They had never encountered serious resistance. Because most species submitted rather than fight a war, they could not win. Paul's fingers flew across his keyboard as he compiled everything he knew. The Zephyrians would not understand what they had done. In their culture, young ones were not especially important. Adults were what mattered. They would see the human children as useful research subjects and bargaining chips. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. Across human space, the reaction was the same everywhere. Military bases went to full alert. Civilian ships were pressed into service. Factories retooled to produce weapons and supplies. Every human who could fight volunteered. Every human who could not fight found other ways to help. Captain Nick Anderson arrived at Earth Command 3 days later. He found Admiral Sullivan in the main briefing room surrounded by holographic displays showing ship positions, supply routes, and intelligence reports. She looked like she had not slept since the crisis began. "Admiral," Nick said as he entered. Kate looked up at him. Nick Anderson was the best special operations officer in the fleet. If anyone could get those children back alive, it was him. "Nick, I need you to build a team, the best people we have. What's the mission?" "Get our kids back." Nick nodded. He had been expecting this. What kind of opposition are we facing? Dr. Paul Martinez entered the briefing room carrying a tablet full of data. The Zephyrian Empire controls 47 star systems. They have approximately 3,000 military vessels. Their technology is roughly equivalent to ours, but their ships are built for conquest, not defense. Where would they take the children? Kate asked. Paul consulted his research. Almost certainly Zephyr Prime. It's their capital world and research center. They would want to study the children in their most secure facility. General Steve Coleman joined the meeting, along with a dozen other high-ranking officers. The room filled with the top military minds in human space. They had fought aliens before, but never for a reason like this. "What's our strategic situation?" Kate asked. Steve activated a star chart showing the region between human and Zephyrian space. "We have 230 ships we can deploy immediately. Another 400 within 2 weeks if we strip. Every other assignment..." "Do it," Kate ordered without hesitation. "Admiral, that leaves our other colonies completely undefended," one of the officers pointed out. Kate's eyes were like steel. "Every human world will understand. This takes priority over everything else." Nick Anderson studied the tactical displays. The Zephyrian Empire was vast and well-defended. A direct assault on their capital would cost thousands of human lives. But he saw something in the faces around him that changed the equation completely. These people would pay any price to get those children back. "I'll need a small, fast ship. And 20 volunteers," Nick said. "We'll need to get close to Zephyr Prime for reconnaissance." "Take whatever you need," Kate replied. Dr. Paul Martinez cleared his throat. "There's something else you should know about Zephyrian psychology. They cannot understand fighting for emotional reasons. Their entire culture is based on logical cost-benefit analysis. They conquer other species because it's profitable. They surrender when conquest becomes too expensive." "What are you saying?" Steve asked. "They will expect us to negotiate, to make reasonable demands, to accept some kind of compromise. They will not understand that we will destroy their entire civilization to get 9 children back." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. Then Admiral Sullivan spoke in a voice that carried absolute certainty. "Good. Let's make sure they learn." Over the next week, human military forces gathered like they never had before. Ships arrived from every corner of human space. Volunteers signed up faster than they could be processed. Weapons factories worked around the clock. The entire human civilization focused on a single goal. Captain Nick Anderson handpicked his team from thousands of volunteers. He chose Lieutenant Maria Santos for intelligence work, Sergeant Carl Brooks for combat operations, Commander Dana White for ship operations. All of them had children of their own. All of them understood exactly what they were fighting for. Meanwhile, intelligence services worked to gather information about Zephyrian defenses. Spy networks that had been dormant for years suddenly activated. Every piece of data about the Zephyrian Empire became precious. Admiral Sullivan barely left the command center. She coordinated the largest military operation in human history while staying in constant contact with colonies across human space. The support was overwhelming. Entire worlds offered their resources. Parents who had never seen military service demanded to be included somehow. But the most important preparation was happening in the hearts and minds of every human involved. This was not about territory or resources or political advantage. This was about something deeper than military strategy. This was about who humans were as a species. Dr. Paul Martinez finished his final report on Zephyrian culture and psychology. He included detailed analysis of their military capabilities, their political structure, and their historical response to different types of threats. But his conclusion was simple. The Zephyrians had made the worst possible mistake. They had threatened human children. They had awakened something in humanity that most species never showed to outsiders. The fierce protective instinct that had helped humans survive on a hostile homeworld was now focused on 9 small prisoners held somewhere in enemy space. Admiral Sullivan read the report and then looked out at the vast fleet assembling near Earth. Hundreds of ships, thousands of crew members, all focused on a mission that might be impossible. But she had seen something in the last week that gave her confidence. She had seen what humans could become when their children were threatened. The Zephyrians thought they were dealing with just another conquered species. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The morning sun rose over New Haven Colony like it had for the past 3 years since humans first settled on Kepler 442b. Jake Morrison stood at his office window watching children run to school, while their parents headed to the farms and research stations. The colony had grown from 50 families to nearly 300. Life was good here. Jake never saw the ships coming. The Zephyrian fleet dropped out of hyperspace without warning. 12 massive warships appeared in the sky above New Haven like dark clouds blocking the sun. Commander Vexthal stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the small human settlement below. His scaled green skin rippled with satisfaction. Another easy conquest for the Zephyrian Empire. The humans had no defense satellites. No orbital platforms, no military ships. Just a small colony of farmers and scientists living on a world they thought was safe. Vexthal had done this 47 times before with other species. The pattern was always the same. Show overwhelming force, take important prisoners, demand surrender. The species always gave up. Humans would be no different. "Begin the assault," Vexthal ordered his crew. The first energy blasts hit the colony's small defense turrets. Jake Morrison watched from his window. As bright flashes destroyed the few weapons New Haven had, the colonists had built those turrets to protect against wild animals, not alien warships. They were gone in seconds. Panic spread through the settlement. Parents grabbed their children. Scientists abandoned their labs, farmers dropped their tools and ran for the emergency shelters. But there was nowhere to hide from ships that size. Lisa. Chen was treating a patient with a broken arm when the attack began. The medical building shook as explosions rocked the colony. She looked out the window and saw strange aircraft landing in the main square. Tall green aliens in black armor stepped, out carrying energy weapons. "Everyone stay calm," Lisa called to her staff, but her voice shook with fear. Ben Parker was only 8 years old, but he understood danger when he saw it. His parents had died in a transport accident 6 months ago, and now the community took care of him. He was playing with his friends Amy Foster and Ryan Mitchell when the alien ships appeared. Amy was 12 and always acted like she knew everything. Ryan was 10 and usually followed whatever Amy decided to do. "We need to hide," Amy whispered as they crouched behind a storage building. "Where can we go?" Ryan asked, his voice small and scared. Ben looked around. The aliens were everywhere. Their ships had landed all over the colony. Green figures in armor walked between the buildings, pointing weapons at any human they saw. Jake Morrison tried to reach the communications center, but alien soldiers blocked his path. One of them raised a weapon and pointed it at his chest. The alien spoke in a strange, clicking language that the universal translator in Jake's earpiece barely understood. You will surrender, or your people will die. Jake raised his hands slowly. He had served in the Earth military before becoming a colony administrator. He knew when fighting was pointless. What do you want from us? The alien tilted its head. Its large yellow eyes studied Jake like he was an interesting insect. Your species will serve the Zephyrian Empire. Resistance is futile. More aliens spread through the colony. They herded humans into groups in the main square. Families held each other close. Children cried. Adults tried to stay calm, but fear showed on every face. Commander Vexthal's shuttle landed near the gathering crowd. He stepped out and looked at the assembled humans. They were smaller than most species the Zephyrians had conquered, weaker looking. Their skin was soft and they had no natural weapons. This would be the easiest conquest yet. I am Commander Vexthal of the Zephyrian Empire, he announced through a translator device. Your world now belongs to us. You will work for the Empire, or you will die. Jake Morrison pushed forward through the crowd. I'm the colony administrator. If you want to negotiate, talk to me. Vexthal looked down at the human. There is nothing to negotiate. You have two choices, serve or die. These are peaceful people, Jake said. Families with children. What could you possibly want from a farming colony? The Empire needs workers, Vexthal replied. Your species will adapt or be eliminated. Science Director Cathara approached the commander. She was smaller than the soldiers, but her scientific uniform marked her as important. Commander, permission to select specimens for study, Vexthal nodded. The Empire always studied new species before deciding how to use them. Choose what you need. Cathara walked through the crowd of humans. Her scanning device beeped as it analyzed their biology. She stopped when she reached the group of children. Ben Parker tried to step back, but there was nowhere to go. Amy Foster held Ryan Mitchell's hand tight. These young ones would be perfect for development studies, Cathara told the commander. We could learn how this species grows and changes. The data would be valuable. Vexthal considered this. Taking prisoners always made conquered species more cooperative. Parents would do anything to save their children. Select the ones you want. Horror spread through the crowd as alien soldiers began separating children from their families. Parents screamed and fought, but the Zephyrians were too strong. Energy weapons stunned anyone who resisted too hard. Lisa Chen tried to reach Ben Parker, but a soldier pushed her back. Please don't take them. They're just children. The young ones will not be harmed if your people cooperate, Vexthal said, but his tone made it clear this was not a promise. Ben felt rough alien hands grab his arms. Amy and Ryan were pulled away from the crowd next to him. He saw other children being taken, too. 9 kids total, all between 7 and 14 years old. Their parents cried and begged, but the aliens ignored them. Jake Morrison memorized every detail he could. The alien ships, their weapons, how many soldiers they had. If any of these children were going to survive, someone had to get word to Earth and the other human colonies. Load the specimens on Transport Ship 7, Cathara ordered. Prepare standard containment fields. The children were pushed toward a smaller ship. Ben looked back at the colony one last time. He saw Jake Morrison watching him. The man's face was full of anger and determination. Ben hoped that meant something. Amy Foster stumbled as the aliens forced her up the ship's ramp. She was scared, but tried not to show it. Her father had taught her about plants and how they survived in harsh conditions. Maybe humans could survive this too. Ryan Mitchell started to cry but tried to muffle the sound. He didn't want the aliens to think he was weak. His mother had always told him to be brave when things got scary. Commander Vexthal watched the loading process with satisfaction. In a few days, these humans would be begging to surrender completely. The Empire would have new workers and new worlds to exploit. It was a perfect operation. The transport ship carrying the children lifted off first. Then the main fleet prepared to depart. They would take the specimens to Zephyr Prime for proper study. The remaining humans could think about their situation while the Empire decided what to do with them. Jake Morrison waited until the alien ships were gone before he moved. Then he ran as fast as he could to the hidden communication station he had built in case of emergencies. His fingers flew over the controls as he sent coded messages to every human world he could reach. The message was simple, but it would change everything. They took our children,